Imagine a world where death is no longer an inevitable end. A future where science and technology doesn't just help save lives, but extends them indefinitely. That sounds like a sci-fi dream, but the truth is this future might not be as far as you think. From merging the human brain to machines to artificial intelligence revolutionizing healthcare and cutting-edge cancer treatment, the boundaries between life and death are shifting faster than we know it. To start our journey into immortality, we need to find a way to transcend the limitations of our biology. And one of the best ways to do this is to merge with machines.
Monkey has been able to control the computer with its brain.
So your brain is composed of neurons. Neurons connect together and form a network that can talk to each other through synapses. They're the connection points between neurons, and they communicate using chemical signals, known as neurotransmitters. All of your senses, everything you experience in life, it's all just neurons firing, electrical signals, or otherwise known as action potentials. When neuron spikes occur, these neurotransmitters are released. Information is then relayed across its synapses and eventually reaches another neuron. Now multiply this process by 100 billion and that's your brain in a nutshell. Electrodes are the way that Neuralink and other medical practices study your brain activity. By placing these electrodes close to neurons, the action potentials that create electric fields inside your brain can be detected and transferred to a machine that records and measures the data. Neuralink plans to use this to its advantage. Your brain has two main systems, your limbic system and your cortex. These two are in a relationship with each other. Your limbic system is responsible for your basic emotions, your survival instinct. Your cortex is responsible for your problem-solving skills, your critical thinking. It's where your consciousness exists. Neuralink is aiming to create a third layer to this. The implants will be a third wheel in this relationship, but would increase our capabilities by multiple orders of magnitude. They plan to increase the number of neurons that you can access regularly, that you can use to remember things or regain access to certain parts of your brain that may no longer be active. This is extremely useful for medical patients, some of which who had absolutely zero options up until Neuralink became a reality. The goal is to make this one of the most simple procedures there is, similar to people getting LASIK to improve their vision. But why do we even need this in the first place? Well, in most cases, it's a bandwidth issue. Now many people hear this but don't exactly understand what that means. It's a speed problem, it's an energy problem. It's how fast you can get information into or out of your brain. If you have something that you want to write down on a computer, you have to type it with your hands, or speak it into a microphone that's probably going to mess it up. If you want to learn something, it could take days, weeks, months, or even years to fully grasp. If we were able to solve this bandwidth issue, we could accomplish exponentially more in less time with much less physical effort. Neuralink cuts out the middleman and allows input and output directly from your brain to whatever you're doing on a machine, or vice versa. It's like going from writing using a quill, to having a pencil, to having a keyboard, to having Siri, to now potentially having nothing but the power of your own brain. This is where brain-machine interfaces come in, and they change everything. A brain-machine interface, or BMI, is composed of two things, a brain and a machine. The machine could be anything, a phone, a computer, a bionic arm, anything that provides you with sensory inputs from the outside world or an external source. These inputs are then returned back into your brain, where you can process them. But you need something artificial in your head to return this data to. Now don't worry, it's not like putting a CPU inside your head. It's actually quite tiny. Each Neuralink N1 chip is roughly 4x4mm with 1,000 electrodes each. It's feasible to fit up to 10 of these inside your head in different areas, all to measure and affect different parts of your brain. But companies and neurosurgeons alike can't just go around throwing anything they want into someone's head. It's usually a lengthy process to getting these things approved by the FDA for medical purposes and later on public use. BMIs contain the potential to help people with a wide range of clinical disorders. Using just 256 electrodes, or about 2.5% the number of electrodes Neuralink eventually plans to use, human patients have been able to control computer cursors, robotic limbs, and speech synthesizers. The full potential with nearly 40 times that amount of electrodes is hard to imagine. Currently, the best FDA-approved BMI is used for Parkinson's patients, and it only has 10 electrodes. For Neuralink, this is just the beginning, and it's already 1,000 times better than what is currently approved. In version 1. Each electrode is inserted into your head via tiny threads that are roughly 5 micrometers thick. They're around 10 times smaller than a human hair and contain 32 electrodes each. It's roughly the same size as a neuron, which is a good idea. There's a size limit for things that you want to stick in your head. Something too large is inevitably going to cause problems, so the smaller, the better. Neuralink actually made a robot that is used to insert these with extreme precision, which is pretty much mandatory. Humans couldn't do it if they wanted. This is a penny. It's pretty small, right? It's roughly the same size as the tip of my thumb. Now, zooming in extremely close, this right here is the needle that will be inserted into your skull. Placing it beside a penny, you actually couldn't see it. As the robot inserts each thread one by one, at the end, there could eventually be up to 10,000 of these electrodes inside your head, each responsible for recording separate neurons which can later on be analyzed. But not only can they read data from your brain, they can also input data as well. It's a two-way street. It's sort of like being able to upload and download things from your brain. Brain implants aren't exactly new either, though. They go as far back as the 1950s. Hearing implants are a good example. Neuralink just plans to take the baton and continue down the path, but in a different way. Other BMIs approach the situation differently. For deep brain stimulation, the kind of implants that were used to assist Parkinson's patients that I mentioned before, they essentially used larger stiff needles that were pretty much just shoved into the brain to affect neural activity, just as the electrodes from Neuralink will. It works well, but there's a pretty high probability that complications will occur over time. Seizures, strokes, and even more. It may fix one issue, but it's probable that multiple other issues will show up. See, your brain doesn't sit still inside your head, it moves around with you. Even if you think you're sitting still, your brain moves with each breath, each heartbeat. This is what can cause issues, and is why a robot is needed for Neuralink's procedure to be successful. Neuralink is taking a different approach, and it really isn't even a huge surgery. Your head isn't going to be completely peeled open for these chips to be inserted. Each chip will be inserted into your head through a small incision of 8 millimeters at most, so less than a centimeter. You won't need stitches, you won't need any of that. It's hardly a surgery at all. By the way, those chips that are inserted are completely wireless, as you would probably hope. The craziest thing of all is that you won't need to go to a hospital or random place to hook yourself up to use this interface. There's no USB port sticking out of your head, you won't need a caretaker or anyone to help you. With the use of a single wireless battery-powered computer behind your ear, it will actually be able to connect you to your smartphone, effectively making your phone an official part of you. The options and potentials for this technology is limitless, and it's only going to improve over time. Now, I don't want to overreach here and throw out ideas that are impossible, so I won't. But I will give some solid uses and some pretty cool ideas for Neuralink that can actually become a reality one day. This is my computer. Ironside sent it to me a couple months back, and it is great for everything I need to do. It has a 2080 Ti graphics card, an i9 processor, and 64GB of RAM. I can edit much faster and more efficiently than I was able to before. I can play pretty much any game on ultra settings. But in order to do these things, I need to use my hands. Well, duh. I need to use a mouse and a keyboard to get things done in the way I want, or to move my character in games. But Neuralink may be able to change this. If a patient is able to control an arm with his or her mind, then it's not unfeasible to believe that, one day, you may be able to control characters in video games with your brain as well. Considering it's all Bluetooth, all wireless, it's not too much of a stretch to ask. This, coupled with advancements in virtual reality, will cause video games, and potentially even films, to become almost fully immersive. Let's take an example of where Neuralink technology could be used in a pretty cool yet practical way. Let's say you're about to take a month-long trip to Tokyo. You're an American, and as most Americans, most of us only speak one language. We'll have no clue how to get around any city that doesn't have street signs or directions completely in English. But luckily, Neuralink can help us out here. Imagine there's a Tokyo local who's lived there his entire life. Looking at the action potentials of that particular person, studying their neuron spikes in a region of their brain called the hippocampus, and in which order they occur, you can trace out a path throughout the entire city from when these neurons spike. And once this data is input into your brain, you'll be able to traverse the city like you've lived there your entire life. Telepathy is no longer unrealistic. The electrode implants that detect neural signals wirelessly transmit their data back to the small computer behind your ear. So, the idea of transferring data back and forth between these devices is relatively simple to imagine. And because the electrodes can both read and write data, you could theoretically communicate back and forth between people who also have Neuralink implants. Now at the moment, the technology isn't exactly close to making this happen. Maybe a word or two. But in theory, and with enough improvements, it is possible for high bandwidth communication between two people using nothing but their minds. It may be an aggressive approach, as Elon tends to take, but you can see Neuralink implants in human patients by the end of this year. And once that happens, it's only up from there. Improvements will slowly be added, and I can honestly see this becoming a big and common practice within the next couple of decades. You always hear that there's new technology coming out that will change our lives. But I'm serious when I say this. If this is taken seriously and can work in the ways we're studying and planning on at the moment, I see this as an invention that is on the scale of the internet. It will change the world the way airplanes impacted travel, the way antibiotics impacted medicine. Computers and the internet threw us into a brand new digital age. Phones and computers have become extensions of human beings. They can answer almost any question you could ask at a moment's notice. They've both been pivotal in connecting the entire planet. BMIs like the one Neuralink are creating are going to have a similar and honestly even larger effect than that. As time goes on, as we enter a new decade, technology that we've passed off as unrealistic becomes more and more plausible. Things that we've written off as impossible end up being the same things that push society forward. Airplanes, rockets, medicine, all things that used to be seen as wizardry or some voodoo magic, are now things that we use every single day. As Neuralink progresses and gets better and better, its cultural impact will grow larger and larger. Kids being born today will grow up in a world vastly different than the one we're living in today, the same way that we're living through a time vastly different than the previous generations. We will make mistakes along the way. The past shows that pretty well. However, humans overcome, we adapt, and we move forward. If you think we're living in the peak of the digital age, you have no idea what's just around the corner.
Today is Neuralink, tomorrow we could be uploading consciousness and achieving digital immortality. But while Neuralink pushes the boundaries of what our minds can achieve, the quest for immortality doesn't stop there. To truly overcome the limitations of the human body, we need to address one of its greatest vulnerabilities: cancer. For years we've heard about all the breakthroughs in cancer therapies, and now, thanks to groundbreaking innovations, that same revolutionary spirit is taking on AL amyloidosis, a condition as complex and life-threatening as cancer. Today I've partnered with a company called MX Biopharma to help bring awareness to the condition and the unbelievable work they're doing to fight it. If you've never heard of it before, AL amyloidosis is a life-threatening disease caused by abnormal plasma cells in the bone marrow. This disease leads to the buildup of harmful proteins in critical organs like the heart, kidneys, and liver. It's a condition that robs patients of energy, breath, and often hope, as they face long diagnostic delays and limited treatment options. But MX Biopharma is working to stop this condition in its tracks with a single transformative treatment called NXC-201, a cutting-edge CAR T-cell therapy. This is more than just a treatment, it's a living medicine. MX Biopharma genetically modifies a patient's cells to re-educate them, teaching them to seek out and destroy the disease cells. Unlike temporary solutions like pills, this is a one-time treatment option where the cells keep fighting until they've eliminated the problem. Other CAR T therapies that have shown promise come with significant risks like neurotoxicity, but NXC-201 has achieved something remarkable: a 75% complete response rate in clinical trials, with no reported neurotoxicity. It's a therapy designed to treat and potentially cure patients, offering them hope for a real recovery. And now, through the NEXA-CART-2 trial, MX Biopharma is bringing this life-changing therapy to the US. This is a glimpse into a future where conditions once thought incurable are met with bold, innovative solutions. MX Biopharma is on a mission to rewrite the rules, not just for AL amyloidosis, but for cancer and beyond. Visit the link in the description to learn about their fight to transform lives. Also, check out their Be Proactive in AL initiative, which promotes early diagnosis and educates patients on available treatment options. The world is full of deadly diseases that are constantly evolving, so we must evolve our treatment options too, if we want to stand a chance against them. But some of the most creative solutions might not come from humans at all. Around 1 in 5 people around the world will develop cancer in their lifetime, with 1 in 9 men and 1 in 12 women dying from the disease. Basically, for every 6 people that die around the world, 1 of them dies from cancer. Cancer is one of the scariest things in the world, and rightfully so. It's said that if you live long enough, cancer will inevitably come for you. It's no surprise that our society has been trying to find a cure for cancer, basically since we knew what it was. With artificial intelligence, we stand a better chance than ever in this war against cancer. This is how AI is transforming healthcare. In a recent study, researchers from the University of Toronto and in silico medicine used a computer program called AlphaFold, along with a tool called Pharma.ai, to speed up the design and synthesis of a drug that could potentially treat hepatocellular carcinoma, the most common type of primary liver cancer. The AI tool found a new target to attack the cancer and a molecule that would stick to that target. This molecule could be included in a new cancer treatment drug. The researchers completed all of this in just 30 days. Now imagine what they could do with more time and more powerful AI tools. We're still at the early stages with tools like AlphaFold, and the problem is that cancer isn't just one thing. It's not just one disease like the flu, it's a multitude of diseases requiring different treatment plans and cures. But scientists have realized that, right now, our best chance at fighting cancer is being able to diagnose it as early as possible. This is where we can see just how incredible artificial intelligence can be. Last year I went to Japan, and while in Tokyo I went to a pastry shop with seemingly endless supplies of pastries. There were pies, cakes, sandwiches, croissants, anything you could ever want. When I picked up everything I wanted, I went up to the register, put all my pastries on the counter, and what I thought was the cash register fired up these green lights that scanned all my pastries. The screen then displayed everything I bought and how much I owed. This was one of the more subtle tech things I had seen in Japan, and so I didn't think anything of it. A couple months ago, I read an article titled, "The AI Pastry Scanner That's Fighting Cancer," and that's when it struck me that wasn't just a cash register, it was an AI used to recognize all the different types of pastries I bought, and now that same AI that was designed for bakeries is being used to diagnose cancer. A doctor at Kyoto's Louis Pasteur Center for Medical Research discovered that some cancer cells look almost exactly like donuts under a microscope, so he contacted the team that created the AI bakery scanner, and Cyto AI Scan was born. Today, the cancer diagnosing AI can identify cancerous urinary cells with up to 99% accuracy. The same technology is also being used to differentiate pills and locate problems in mechanical engineering. Artificial intelligence has taken over our world in the past couple of years. ChatGPT got 1 million users in 5 days, and its parent company OpenAI has just taken the world by storm again after releasing Sora, their text-to-video AI platform. This platform has gotten even the best video creators in the world worried. However, what we don't often hear about, because it's not as exciting, is what AI is doing in the world of healthcare. According to Harvard School of Public Health, using AI to make diagnoses can reduce treatment costs by up to 50% while increasing health outcomes by 40%. So you're getting much better care at half the price. In one study, US, German, and French researchers used AI to scan more than 100,000 images to identify skin cancer. They found they got better results than the 58 international dermatologists who were given a similar test. Several studies have also shown that AI is already better at spotting malignant tumors than the best radiologists in the world. When you consider that artificial intelligence is only going to get better, you can see why those in this field of research are excited. In many areas across the globe, there aren't enough physicians to meet the population's needs. Researchers in the field of medical technology believe that AI can be used to fill this gap. Imagine a world where anyone with just an internet connection can access health information quickly and conveniently. And no, I'm not talking about Googling your symptoms only to be told you have cancer. Google researchers have developed an experimental diagnostic AI called Amy, Articulate Medical Intelligence Explorer, that aims to replicate the feeling of talking to your doctor through a large language model. You provide your symptoms through the text chat interface, and Amy asks you questions and gives you treatment recommendations based on your answers, just like any human doctor would. Researchers behind Amy claim that it outperforms clinicians in diagnostic accuracy and performance. If you understand how LLMs work, this isn't surprising. We've already talked about how good AI is at identifying patterns with medical imaging, and it's the same thing here, just with disease symptoms. Right now, Amy is still experimental and has limitations, but this gives us a glimpse into the future. What is available right now, though, is AI transforming the administrative tasks in the world of healthcare. When we think of healthcare, we often think of talking to a doctor, getting surgery, and grabbing meds from the pharmacy. But what we don't often think about is all the administrative work that goes on behind the scenes to make our experience of going to the hospital as seamless as possible. Today, the average nurse in the United States spends 25% of their work time on regulatory and administrative activities. Through research, the main thing I've realized is that AI isn't here to replace doctors and other medical health professionals, at least not in the near future. Right now, the most impactful thing AI can do is to help with things like these administrative tasks, the more mundane and monotonous side of healthcare that we don't really like to think about, to allow the human physicians the time and mental capacity to perform more complex tasks. One of the biggest challenges the healthcare industry faces is us, the patients. You see, there's only so much a doctor can do with the limited time they see you in the hospital. The bulk of the work that goes into keeping you healthy has to be done by you. Research has shown that the more patients proactively take care of themselves, the better the outcome of their treatment. The problem, though, is that many people don't have the required knowledge or willpower to follow through with the plans and make the behavioral changes necessary to improve their health. Thankfully, this is another area in which AI can help. Machine learning can be used to personalize care to a level that would be impossible for a human physician. A machine will also be there 24/7 and can implement things like message alerts and timely checkups to ensure patients are sticking to their treatment plans. Right now, ChatGPT is being used to help patients with diabetes better understand their diagnosis and treatment options. Researchers have also found that it can help them monitor their symptoms and adherence to treatment, provide feedback and encouragement, and answer their questions. ChatGPT and other similar tools can also be used to rewrite the treatment plan that's been prescribed by medical professionals into different reading levels and possibly languages. This reduces the barrier of entry for the patient to understand what they need to do and empowers everyone, regardless of education level, to take better control of their health. There is a concern with using AI in healthcare though, and that's the data. Who gets access to your healthcare data? How much more information do we want to give Silicon Valley tech companies about ourselves and our health? The infamous Golden State Killer was caught decades after his crimes through an open source DNA database. He never submitted his DNA, but investigators linked crime scene samples to the DNA of his extended family. There's been other cases where criminals have been caught in a similar way, and you might say this is a good thing, and it is, but where do we draw the line? Today it's used to catch criminals who got away, tomorrow it might be used to catch peaceful protesters whose only crime is disagreeing with the government of the day. There's also the issue of insurance companies using this health information to inflate insurance prices for people predisposed to certain illnesses. We would have to fix these issues before we can dream of a world where AI and doctors work hand in glove to save lives. And to be honest, that future is incredible when you envision it, because even if a world where you'll be completely attended to by an AI doctor is still a fair distance away, or even might never come, the world today is already filled with amazing tools that are pushing the needle of medical care forward. At least for now, there are some things humans will always be better at than AI. Things like dealing with complex or otherwise sensitive information like mental health issues, chronic illnesses, and end-of-care life. AI also has to still pass the hurdle of trust, because if the public doesn't trust AI, it won't be able to help them with their health effectively. Has mixed results. On the one hand, some studies show that people do trust AI for things like diagnosis, treatment, and monitoring, with around 80% of Americans willing to use these tools to help manage their health. On the other hand, 60% of people in the same study were uncomfortable with healthcare providers relying on AI for medical care. So there's still some work to be done in building public trust. That's what companies like MedBrite hope to achieve with their AI tool, to build trust in technology by making the hospital and human clinicians easier to access and better equipped to do their jobs. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, algorithms, whatever name you decided to call them, these tools are transforming our world at a much faster pace than we ever could have imagined. We talk a lot about the dangers of AI, but the truth is, in the right hands, artificial intelligence can do incredible things. Who knows, maybe one day it'll help us find the cure for cancer, but even if it doesn't, we at least know it'll help us find it before any human can. From acting as individual caregivers to offering solutions to broader societal issues, here is how AI is going to save our world in ways that we never imagined. But it's not just about curing diseases. AI is helping us dream bigger. What if these technologies weren't just reactive, but proactive, saving humanity in ways we never imagined? The first ultra-intelligent machine is the last invention that man need ever make. The statement was made by mathematician Irving John Good in 1965. He was envisioning a machine smarter than any human who had ever lived, one that would design even smarter machines and leave humans in the dust. Now, while we haven't created an ultra-intelligent machine, we have successfully created something that could end our species, but if used correctly, could also save us. In the history of our species, we've been remarkably skilled at inventing and using tools to further our civilization, From the stone axes and spears of our ancestors to steam engines and computers, the knowledge and intuition used to create these tools has allowed us to improve the quality of our lives tremendously. Today we stand on the precipice of a new invention, artificial intelligence, the next chapter in our story, but unlike the tools of the past, AI could do both harm and good. So what if we invented the wheel but didn't know how to use it? So what if the light bulb was never imagined? If these inventions failed, the most likely outcome is that our civilization would probably just continue the status quo. But with the addition of AI, things are about to change. On the one hand, a sentient AI, if that's even a possibility, could dethrone humans as the smartest species on Earth and try to take over the planet for its own benefit. But if we can harness the power of artificial intelligence and put it to good use, it could potentially save us and the entire planet. This is how AI will save humanity. Just before we talk about the ways AI is already changing our world, I realize that most people don't have problems with AI itself, but with how it's being developed, and I completely understand that. I feel that way as well. To help us prevent Skynet from happening, people like you and me who care about the ethical use of AI need to get into the rooms where these decisions are made, and to do that, we need to start a career in tech. AI has advanced rapidly in recent years, which is why visions of sentient machines taking over the world have been dominating the news cycle. There is, and rightfully so, a lot of criticism surrounding the rapid development of artificial intelligence. We've made several videos talking about the dangers of algorithms and AI tools like ChatGPT right here on the channel, but among all of that, there are a lot of positives that have come with the development of AI, some of which are already revolutionizing our world. Cancer is one of the biggest hurdles we have to face as a species. Research shows that if you live long enough, cancer will eventually kill you if you don't die of something else first. 1 in 2 people in the world will develop some form of cancer during their lifetime. The numbers are scary, but they might not be for much longer. Artificial intelligence is helping to advance cancer treatment by quickly understanding how cancerous cells become resistant to anti-cancer drugs. AI tools can help to massively improve cancer drug development and use. Pharmaceutical companies are using AI to scan through large volumes of data and use predictive analysis to figure out which molecules are best suited for use in medication to fight cancer. And it's not just theory. In a recent study, researchers from the University of Toronto and Insilico Medicine used a computer program called AlphaFold along with a tool called Pharma.ai to find a new way to treat liver cancer. The AI tool found a new target to attack the cancer and also found a molecule that would stick to that target. This molecule could be included in a new cancer treatment drug. The researchers completed all of this in just 30 days, so imagine what they could do with more time and more powerful AI tools. Artificial intelligence is also being used in medical imaging, analyzing CT scans, X-rays, and MRIs to find lesions or other abnormalities a human radiologist might miss. These are pattern-oriented repetitive tasks, exactly what machines excel at. Even if AI isn't able to assist with critical areas like surgery or specialized care just yet, if it can improve the productivity of medical professionals by 2 to 3 times, which is probably a conservative estimate, it might just be that we have a healthcare revolution at our hands. Research shows by the year 2034, there may be a shortage of up to 48,000 primary care physicians. Tools like these might allow us to bridge the gap between the amount of care we require and the number of physicians available to give us that treatment. There was a recent incident where an unknown tick-borne disease on a dog was producing confusing symptoms. The dog's worried owner put the details of its symptoms into GPT-4, which hypothesized what the condition might be. The owner took this information to a second veterinarian, who confirmed one of the probable diagnoses that GPT-4 had suggested. While the puppy still definitely needed to see a real vet, GPT-4 was able to massively speed up the time it took to diagnose the illness. Today the dog has made a full recovery, thanks in part to GPT-4. AI can also assist people with living disabilities by enabling them to live more independently. GPT-4 is being incorporated into apps like Be My Eyes and Virtual Volunteer to help the blind and visually impaired to better interpret the world around them. We also now have nearly accurate real-time captioning software that allows people with a hearing impairment to watch movies, follow along with online classes, or even take calls from loved ones. AI has the potential to create life-changing opportunities for people living with disabilities. It makes it easier to create interactive tools to support both physical and mental accessibility, and to promote independence. Speaking of mental accessibility, mental health issues have been on the rise in recent decades, placing a significant burden on individuals, families, and society as a whole. AI can be used to assist the creation of diagnostic tools, personalized treatment plans, and even provide virtual therapy through chatbots and other interactive platforms. In fact, this has been a surprising reason why a lot of people have been using ChatGPT lately. It's no wonder that there was a significant drop in the number of posts per day on the relationship advice subreddit right after ChatGPT's release. The immediate access, the complete lack of judgment, and its creative potential make ChatGPT an excellent mental health aid. It can help address the shortage of mental health professionals, increase access to care, and reduce any stigma associated with seeking help. Education is another area where the powers of AI could be harnessed to do amazing things. People who are dyslexic have been flocking to Reddit communities to say how ChatGPT has allowed them to learn things at their own pace, something a traditional classroom setting could never provide at scale, and how they wished it had existed before. We've had online classes before, yes, but though they were accessible, the content was never tailored to each person's individual needs. With artificial intelligence tools, you can create that with just one prompt. Of course, there is a trade-off here. Many students have simply started copying and pasting information given to them by AI without actually reading or understanding any of it. People are genuinely worried that this might cause students to lose interest in learning anything. Why bother when they can just ask ChatGPT to spit out the answers to their assignments? But is this the fault of the tool or of our current education system? Let's consider a similar scenario. One of the greatest capabilities of ChatGPT is writing and debugging code. You might imagine that this would discourage people from learning to code. That is, until you read about the people who have, for the first time in their lives, found a friend, so to speak, who will not only give them examples of good code. ChatGPT can also tell them what mistakes they made and speak to them with a respectful tone as opposed to coding forums that are known to criticize users for asking too obvious questions. I'm a victim of that myself. The potential of AI in education is huge, with its ability to customize learning experiences to individual students and to bridge the gap between well-resourced and under-resourced schools. By identifying and addressing each student's unique needs, strengths, and weaknesses, AI can encourage a more inclusive and effective learning environment, which has the potential to reduce educational inequality. One of the GPT-4 demos included writing the code of a website from a rough drawing on a napkin. Imagine how much power that gives a small business owner to start their own project. Something that previously would have required a lot of money and time can now be done with a few well-written prompts. There is an obvious concern about job displacement with all of this, but how many people live to write emails? How much meaning does one get by spending hours debugging code only to find out what was missing was a semicolon? Wouldn't we rather spend our time on more meaningful pursuits, trying to understand the meaning of life and our place in the universe? These are the areas that large language models aren't able to compete with humans, and without a fundamental restructuring of their architecture, cognitive scientist and AI researcher Ben Goertzel thinks that they are never realistically going to be able to think like that anyways. Purely from a knowledge and research perspective, even though AI isn't intelligent enough to make decisions on its own, just being able to summarize large quantities of information will massively assist innovation and research. Combined with its teaching abilities, power to analyze large quantities of data, and ability to brainstorm, you have an information juggernaut on your hands that will revolutionize the way you learn and understand things. This even applies to the wisdom of the past. AI can help with the preservation and dissemination of human knowledge and cultural heritage. As our world becomes increasingly digital, there's a risk that important historical artifacts, documents, and any works of art may be lost or forgotten. AI can assist in the digitization, organization, and analysis of vast amounts of cultural data, ensuring that future generations can learn from and appreciate the accomplishments of those who came before. ChatGPT is fundamentally a language model and has now been used to speak languages that are nearly extinct. This is absolutely vital to their preservation. In fact, ChatGPT was recently used to recreate native-sounding phrases from the Chinook jargon language, a Native American language that's almost extinct. Now, take a moment to imagine harnessing all these powers to solve the most dire problems that our civilization faces. Whether it's climate change, an asteroid impact, or another raging pandemic, or depleting energy resources, artificial intelligence can help with all of these. It can legitimately accelerate innovation, programmers can be more efficient, researchers can churn out more output, and the healthcare system can ease the pressure and be prepared for when it's really needed. I mean, looking at all of this, isn't it immoral to not embrace AI at this point? What inventions might a superhumanly capable artificial general intelligence make? Asked Ben Goertzel, referring to a machine similar to the one John Irving Good also imagined. Perhaps little things like curing cancer, death, and mental illness, solving climate change, space travel, mind uploading, cheap food, fusion energy.
an era of abundance in which nobody has to work for a living, and people can focus on social, spiritual, artistic, and intellectual fulfillment. Or as AGI researcher Jorsha Bach put it, there may be a 10% probability that people will die if we build artificial general intelligence. But there is a 100% probability that people will die if we don't. Especially you.
Immortality may still feel like a distant dream, but companies like Imix are driving us toward it and reshaping what it means to be human. Today it's cutting-edge treatment for a specific kind of cancer, tomorrow it could be all cancer, and then all diseases. Immortality truly is closer than you think.
The time is 10 a.m. A young man is folded on the floor of a dark cell. A gentle tap wakes him up from his sleep. The governor tells him that his execution time has been set for 10 a.m. that very morning. He immediately sat up in disbelief. He expected that death would come in weeks due to the usual formalities that come with being a prisoner of war. He wanted to argue, but his lips wouldn't form any words. All he could mutter was, "It's very hard to bear. It's so sudden." When you are sentenced to death, there is no hope. Death is certain and has a specific appointment. If you were to get chased, you would at least be concerned with escaping before your demise and that life would still be possible. You would not have the time to consider the finality of your life. But when you have been told what time you will go, it is very difficult to process. As he was brought out to the execution grounds, he left a choking in his throat. His mind wanted to fight, but his body was powerless and unable to move. A priest presented him with a silver cross. He kissed it greedily and thought of his brother at the last minute, realizing how much he loved and missed him. He and his fellow prisoners, including a close friend, were tied to pillars. Bags were put over their heads. It was almost time. But then, just before shots were fired, he was released, along with the rest of the group. His Imperial Majesty has granted us our lives. The Russian author Fyodor Dostoevsky survived his near-death experience. The whole ordeal was staged, intended to be the first step of his punishment, psychological torture. One of the prisoners who stood with him was completely broken from this event and driven to insanity. But Dostoevsky triumphed over death and was inspired to embrace life in a way that he had never done before. However, that would only be the beginning of the many fights Dostoevsky would have with death, both physically and mentally. My life begins again today. I will receive 4 years hard labor and after that will serve as a private. I see that life is everywhere, life in ourselves. There will be people near me, and to be among them, that is the purpose of life, I have realized. Before his fake execution, he saw life quite differently. Dostoevsky spent much of his childhood in the residence of Moscow's Mariinsky Hospital for the Poor. His father was a physician, which meant that Fyodor witnessed the struggles of the sick and the impoverished up close. He was also introduced to literature at a young age. Although he would become a lieutenant engineer, he was distracted by literary opportunities. After translating several texts with little financial success, in 1845 he published his first novel, Poor Folk. It was an immediate success, and he quickly explored literary circles, where he started to embrace the values of utopian socialism. He would meet with socialist groups and discuss reforms such as abolishing serfdom and establishing freedom of press. By this point, both of his parents had died, and his health was compromised by epilepsy. He was prone to seizures that he believed were triggered by losing sleep, drinking too much, and overworking. Before the seizures, Dostoevsky describes feelings of déjà vu and following them overwhelming fatigue. They had a lasting impact on his health and instilled a sense of fear that the seizures could happen at any time. Life was already a struggle, but everything took a sharp turn for the worse. His regular meetings with socialist groups caught the attention of the Russian Empire. Tsar Nicholas I was worried about a revolution and determined that critics of the government were dangerous. They needed to be detained, and that meant that vocal critics such as the socialist groups were at great risk. Dostoevsky's involvement in the Petrushevsky circle is what ultimately led to his arrest. He was accused of being critical of the armed forces and creating anti-Russian government propaganda on an illegal printing press. After his mock execution in 1849, He was sentenced to 4 years of hard labor in Siberia, which was brutal and degrading. Guards took joy in humiliating prisoners and dehumanizing them. Dostoevsky describes this horrible treatment in his 1862 novel, The House of the Dead. He uses the character Goryanchikov as a vehicle to convey his own experience in the Siberian prison camp. In the story, the protagonist has killed his wife and turned himself in. From there, the first-person diary describes the true horrors of the camp. During his confinement, Goryanchikov was never alone. Prisoners had no privacy at any time and were in close quarters, always sharing rooms and always being visible. They were confined to filthy conditions, forced to live in squalor, and in close proximity to antisocial individuals. The camp was a form of hell where suffering was present everywhere. Each prisoner was forced to share a room with a rotating number of inmates. Many would make Goryanchikov feel unsafe as he tried to rest. Sleep under these conditions was almost impossible. What the prisoners of the camp lacked most of all was human dignity. It was denied to them thoroughly by the conditions, the proximity to other inmates, and the cruelty of the guards. At the camp, the prisoners were forced to do manual labor. They had to make bricks and dig up earth. And although the actual work was not tiring, there was something truly awful about it. There was a purpose to the work, but that purpose was not relevant to the prisoners. As Goryanchikov explains, it once came into my head that if I were desired to reduce a man to nothing, to punish him atrociously, to crush him in such a manner that the most hardened murderer would tremble before such a punishment and take fright beforehand, it would be necessary to give his work a character of complete uselessness, even to absurdity. A farmer may work harder and longer hours than the prisoner, but they are working to suit their own ends. Their labor produces fruit that the convict could never hope to enjoy. The other inmates in the House of the Dead cause the narrator great misery, but also become a source of value. Goryanchikov develops relationships with them. They form bonds, share stories, and humanize each other. Goryanchikov also recounts how the characters manage to find freedom in the camp. They smuggle alcohol to trade for currency, which they are able to use as they please. This gives some of the prisoners a sense of agency that the camp has largely robbed them of. The prison does not reform the inmates, but through denying human dignity, makes them monsters. Systematically, it perpetuates a cycle of violence. Corporal punishment is inflicted on them, and it shapes who they become. It does not impact their moral guidance. In Dostoevsky's real-life experience of a Siberian camp, many of his fellow prisoners died in the brutal conditions. Yet again, Dostoevsky would simply not let death win. Instead, like his traumatic episode with the faked firing squad, his time in the camp shaped his view of life in a tremendous way that he would explore more in his other novels. Human life deserves dignity and freedom. That's what was taken away from Dostoevsky when he was first apprehended and what he eventually got back. The author insists that our need for freedom is what makes us human. After his time at the camp, he was forced into military service in the Siberian Army Corps for a few years. To start publishing again, he had to send a formal letter of apology to the government. In 1857, he married a widow named Maria Isayeva. On their honeymoon, she witnessed one of his seizures, complicating their marriage from that point onward. His health struggles and their unique personalities put pressure on their union until she died just 7 years later. During his time in prison, Dostoevsky developed a distaste for the ideology he once embraced, which became a big theme in his work. 2 years after publishing The House of the Dead, Dostoevsky released Notes from the Underground, in which he expressed his rejection of the way the socialist radicals of his time viewed humanity in a mechanistic way. In his novel, he highlights a Russian society that is increasingly using science to understand human beings. Humanity is treated as an entity determined by casual laws. The liberals of the time suggested that we can understand human behavior psychologically and human history in a strictly casual manner. The unnamed narrator in the book is critical of the idea that a utopian society can be built based on strictly casual understandings of human beings. Even if it could, he believes people would hate being treated this way. The narrator explains his position. If you say that this too can be calculated and tabulated, chaos and darkness and curses, so that the mere possibility of calculating it all beforehand would stop it all, and reason would reassert itself, then man would purposely go mad in order to be rid of reason and gain his point. This utopian society would undermine the one value that gives life its meaning, our capacity to choose and build our own lives. In their vision for the future, he saw reflections of the prison camp that robbed him of his agency and his dignity. In the second half of the book, the narrator reflects on his past behavior, acting out against his casual understanding of the human being. Out of spite, he starts acting against his best interests. He behaves like a complete fool at a party. When his tooth aches, he refuses to go to the dentist. When the man is shown warmth, he rejects it. Eventually, he causes his own destruction, demonstrating that his rejection of casuality and systemization isn't any better than the utopian version of society. Dostoevsky inspired many other works of fiction, including the 1924 dystopian book We by Yevgeny Zamyatin. In the novel, the author portrays the world as a futuristic version of the socialist utopia. As in most dystopias, the main character, D503, feels that something is wrong with his society. He wants to make choices for himself, including who he loves and what he learns. Eventually, D503 tries to break free of the society that satiates and controls him. The book is meant to reflect our human need to be treated as ambiguous while predicting the terrors of the Soviet Union. It is a precursor to other dystopian classics such as 1984 and Brave New World. In Notes from the Underground, Dostoevsky demonstrates the human need for freedom of choice while also showing how a reckless pursuit of it can cause great harm. We have to be thoughtful in how we react to ideology. It is not enough to just mirror their position. In The Possessed, one of his follow-up novels, Dostoevsky directly attacks utopian socialism and the notion of enforced equality. Through his characters, he expresses his concern that such a utopia requires suppression of all independent thought and individuality. Here's an excerpt from one of the critics in the novel. "But what are the men I've broken with? The enemies of all true life. Out-of-date liberals who are afraid of their own independence. The flunkies of thought. The enemies of individuality and freedom. The decrepit advocates of deadness and rottenness. All they have to offer is senility and glorious mediocrity of the most bourgeois kind. Contemptible shallowness, a jealous equality, equality without individual dignity." The book portrays intellectuals as ruthless and uncaring of how their designs would impact the people they supposedly speak on behalf of. Dostoevsky clearly sides and sympathizes with the ordinary people in society over calculating intellectuals. After his time in prison, he had an admiration for persons who didn't try to impose their theories on others. In his most well-known book, 1866's Crime and Punishment, Dostoevsky challenges his ideological approach to life specifically. He gives a close-up view of his attitude in action in all its grotesqueness. The book focuses on Raskolnikov, a former student who struggles with financial problems. He's also a theorist who publishes work on the subject of extraordinary people. In his theory, Raskolnikov suggests that it's okay for great people like Napoleon and Caesar to commit immoral acts. He divides people into two categories: extraordinary people and people who just exist to procreate. He contends that we should allow great people to transgress to make progress possible. Raskolnikov goes on to question morality in general. What if man is not really a scoundrel? Man in general, I mean, the whole race of mankind. Then all of the rest is prejudice, simply artificial terrors, and there are no barriers and it's all as it should be. Raskolnikov's view aligns somewhat with Friedrich Nietzsche's concept of higher and lower types. Nietzsche believed that the norms of morality shouldn't apply to everyone, and that they would limit higher types in their pursuit of excellence. Dostoevsky was not aware of Nietzsche's work, however. In Crime and Punishment, Raskolnikov decides to solve his financial problems by putting his theory to the test. He murders an old pawnbroker woman in cold blood, and then an innocent bystander who witnesses the immediate aftermath. In his mind, he believes that great people such as himself should be allowed to kill, but also that the pawnbroker woman deserved it for oppressing the poor. He has a mess of justifications in his mind. The act is brutal in depiction and feels incredibly unnatural. Few other stories demonstrate murder outside of necessity or psychopathy. A killing committed with only loose theoretical justification is extraordinarily awkward and grotesque. In the aftermath, guilt tears Raskolnikov apart. He feels a horrible sense of isolation from others, laying sickly in bed, avoiding life in any capacity. Our protagonist is a complete mess. He tries to understand exactly why he committed the murders, but he can never come to a definitive conclusion. As he wallows in misery, Detective Porfiry Petrovich picks up on his guilt, but has no concrete evidence. Petrovich toys with Raskolnikov until he offers him a more lenient sentence in return for a confession. In the end, it is a Christian sex worker, Sonia, who convinces Raskolnikov to confess. He mostly confesses out of emotional stress, but later repents with Sonia's guidance. Raskolnikov is sentenced to a Siberian prison camp where Sonia follows. Raskolnikov dehumanizes his primary victim using theory. He forces an ideology on her with horrific consequences. The world around the main character is also engaging in a similar process. Russian society is going through a major reform that results in an intense period of poverty and crime. Serfdom was abolished in 1861, but the serfs themselves were worse off because of how emancipation unfolded. Landowners kept most of their land, and the serfs had to compensate them for the rest. Since they had no money, they had to borrow it from the state and landowners. However, the land the serfs received was largely small and in poor quality. They struggled to pay the taxman, and many were swallowed by debt. In his novel, Dostoevsky details the widespread poverty and crime that results from the emancipation. This serves as a reminder of how reforms can leave people behind, even if they're intended to help humanity. Ideologues rarely account for the important details such as human dignity and welfare. The author himself struggled financially for most of his writing career. He needed his books to succeed to pay off his debts. Losing most of his finances gambling, Dostoevsky wrote The Gambler and Crime and Punishment under intense deadlines. He had to hire a stenographer just to finish them, who he married shortly after. He also continued to struggle with epilepsy. His seizures left him in poor health for extended periods of time. He had to fit in his writing between bouts of exhaustion, which put further financial strain on him and his new family. He put a lot of his life and perspective into his work, from his epilepsy to his Christianity. In 1869's The Idiot, he writes about a fictional prince who suffers from seizures and represents a Christ-like figure. Prince Mishkin is gentle, kind, and very generous. He tries to be as selfless as possible in his interactions and timidly resists his desires for pleasure. The prince also finds beauty in life regardless of his circumstances. I used to watch The Line Where Earth and Sky Met, and longed to go and seek there the key of all mysteries, thinking that I might find there a new life, perhaps some great city where life should be grander and richer, and then it struck me that life may be grand enough even in a prison. Mishkin is released from a mental institution and becomes entangled with two distinct groups. One consists of rich, worldly people who are powerful and conservative. The other consists of young, rebellious youth who are very intellectual but foolish at the same time. For his Christ-like behavior, both groups despise Mishkin for stepping on their toes. Later in the story, the prince has the option of choosing between two women to marry. In his mind, he would choose Nastasia out of compassion and Aglaya out of desire. He tries to pick Nastasia selflessly, but on their wedding day, she leaves him. She finds Prince Mishkin to be too pure. Nastasia instead runs to Rogozhin, a man who is very jealous of the prince's engagement to Nastasia. Rogozhin kills her, and the prince goes mad while trying to console Rogozhin in his anguish. In The Idiot, Dostoevsky tries to demonstrate how a Christ-like figure would fit into 1860s Russian society, and as you can tell, it didn't go very well. Everyone around the prince hates him and ends up worse off in general. Dostoevsky rejects the values of materialism embodied by the conservative elite and young rebels. He shows us that the Russian society at the time would revile Christ in the flesh, even if most would still claim to believe in Christianity. In his opinion, Russian society needed to completely rethink its religious values. The Brothers Karamazov was Dostoevsky's last book, published in 1880. He wrote it 3 months before he died of 3 pulmonary hemorrhages. These were a result of several seizures happening in quick succession. While Dostoevsky was a Christian, he was also a skeptic. He constantly challenged his beliefs in Christianity, even if he always remained a believer. In a well-known letter, he writes, "If someone proved to me that Christ is outside of the truth, and that in reality truth were outside of Christ, then I should remain with Christ rather than with the truth." With the brothers Karamazov, he uses an intellectual character, Ivan, to give a blistering challenge against God. In the chapter The Grand Inquisitor, Ivan writes a story about Christ returning to his world during the Spanish Inquisition, a period in history where the monarchy in Spain forced Jews to be baptized or face death. Many were killed, and the ones who converted under pressure were always confronted with suspicion. When Christ arrives, the Inquisitor immediately arrests him as a heretic of the Church. He yells at Christ for offering the people freedom when what they really want is security. They want to be certain that they have no possibility of committing error and sin. As the Inquisitor explains, "There are three powers alone, able to conquer and to hold captive forever the conscience of these impotent rebels for their happiness. Those forces are miracle, mystery, and authority." The Church has essentially adapted to the weakness of humanity with control. In this chapter, Dostoevsky criticizes both the Catholic Church and the socialists of his time. Both seek to impose authority on people who are supposedly too weak to know what is best for them. He wants to return to a more pure version of Christianity that respects the freedom of the individual, their moral responsibility, and their dignity. Dostoevsky had a strong fondness for Russian Orthodoxy, which he believed was the religion of the common people. The Church in Spain wanted to create a Christian kingdom here on earth, but Christ rejected the enforcement of belief as documented in the biblical narrative referred to as the temptation of Christ. He wanted people to believe in him through free will and faith. Jesus is silent as the Inquisitor yells at him. Interpretations vary, but it's possible that Christ is trying not to interfere with humanity's free will in the story. He is showing by example, not telling. The chapter ends with Christ kissing the Inquisitor on the lips. The Inquisitor releases him, but tells him to never return again. When people suffer traumatic incidences, they often respond by trying to control their surroundings. From experiencing an overwhelming sense of powerlessness, they grow to want people and situations to be predictable. They are adverse to risk and demand perfection. For hours, Dostoevsky thought he was going to be put to death. It was an incredible moment of powerlessness. He had to confront the certainty of his life ending at a set time. As he described in letters and books, this punishment is even more cruel than the crime of murder, as the victim of murder isn't certain they will die. But his imprisonment wasn't justified on any moral grounds. He was apprehended for independent thought because the prospect of revolution threatened the Russian Tsar. He had to stomach a sentencing that he could not rationalize himself. Although his life was returned to him, he still had to give up control over his destiny to the state for several years. In grueling conditions, he worked toward an end that was not his own and suffered constant abuse from guards and inmates. The author lost 2 children at young ages. His first wife and brother died months apart. Both were dear to him and, at the time, were his only strong connections in the world. He writes about his loss in the letter to his friend, Baron Rangel. "And thus I suddenly found myself alone and simply terrified. My entire life at one stroke broke into 2. In one half, which I had lived through, was everything I had lived for, and in the other, still unknown half, everything was strange and new, and there was not a single heart that could replace those 2. Literally, I had nothing left for which to live." So much of his life was beyond his control, and yet Dostoevsky didn't abandon life for security. He came to value it more and encouraged others to do the same in his body of work. He believed in the valuing of human dignity, freedom, and moral responsibility. This is how he fought death and won, by embracing what he determined to be fundamental demands of human life, found in your common man, beyond intellectual scheming. However, Dostoevsky was writing in a specific place in time. What he considered to be enemies of human dignity have changed and grown in many cases. Utopian socialism would eventually be channeled into Leninism. Much of what he expressed in The Possessed came to fruition in the Soviet Union. Our materialist preoccupations have grown exponentially as capitalism has become the dominant ideology worldwide. Worker exploitation is slowly eroding our freedom to choose a life for ourselves and maintain human dignity. Every day, more of the fruits of our labor goes to the leadership class while we're expected to work longer hours. Like in the Siberian prison camp, many are borderline stuck in their low-paying positions, especially with the cost of living being so high. The church in the United States is trying to create a Christian kingdom once more, despite the teachings of Christ in the Bible. We don't have to agree with Dostoevsky's Christian worldview to appreciate his project and his personal story. We can certainly question the role of moral responsibility in society and the notion of a Christian God. The author himself always checked his belief with a healthy amount of skepticism, after all. But the notion of cherishing life after nearly losing it is something valuable we should all remind ourselves of. If you find yourself diminishing human life in favor of ideology or principles, remind yourself that there's nothing more important in this world than the living. There will be people near me, and to be among people. That is the purpose of life, I have realized.
Death can only be interpreted by people who are alive. Yet, since no one who is alive can simultaneously experience what it's like to be dead, who then does death actually concern? This logic is oddly reassuring. Even so, if my doctor were to call me up right now and tell me that I would die in 12 hours, I would still likely spend all that time in a state of debilitating fear and anxiety. Just thinking about this possibility makes me realize that whether I like it or not, death terrifies me right now, even as a person who is fortunate enough to be in good health. It seems irrational and perhaps illogical to fear something that I have so little knowledge about or control over. But no matter what I do, I just can't seem to shake this nagging fear of the unknown. And I'm not alone. According to the 2017 survey of American fears conducted by Chapman University, 20.3% of Americans are either afraid of or very afraid of dying. But why do we have such a strong fear of death? Before we continue with our story, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor for today's video, Milanote. One of the most difficult parts of creating these videos is planning everything out, from figuring out what the story is going to be, including the main talking points, to finding the visuals that would best communicate those ideas that we want to share. Some people like to solve this issue by organizing their ideas in a note-taking app, others a spreadsheet, and some a vision board. But all of these methods have their shortcomings, which is why I love Milanote, because it gives me the best features of all three methods in one easy-to-use platform. Milanote is the tool that I use to collect my thoughts, find reference images for those thoughts, and plan out how I want the videos to go from start to finish. When I'm on the go, I use the mobile app to quickly get the thoughts out of my head, and then once I get on my laptop, I jump into the web version of the app and start expressing these really complex ideas in a very easy to understand visual map. With 100 built-in templates for video creators, photographers, designers, and more, diving straight into a project on Milanote is quick and easy, and you can share those ideas with the rest of your team within minutes, making collaboration easy and straightforward, but also very efficient. Whether you want to create videos like this one or plan your next holiday trip with friends, Milanote is available for free with no time limit. Sign up using the link in the description and start on your next creative project. Back to our story. The fear of death largely comes from the uncertainty and lack of control of the situation. But perhaps there's a better way to think about our lives and our eventual passing that might end this fear, or at least chip away at its root cause. To start off, let's talk about the only other life event, aside from death, which has happened and will continue to happen to every single person who will ever exist on this planet. Birth. Try to imagine the moment you were born. Of course, you can't actually remember this, I know, but just try for a second to bring yourself back to that time. The moment when you were pulled out of the darkness by a mysterious set of hands, only to be flooded by fluorescent lights and the chaotic bustle of a delivery room. As your eyes adjusted to the light for the very first time, you also had to take in a room full of total strangers who were all likely staring at you. Some of whom you'd never see again, and others you could go on to spend the next 80 plus years with on this journey we call life. This journey that you, in that hospital room however many years ago, had absolutely no tangible knowledge about. We talk about how scary death is, but the truth is birth was probably equally as scary, if not more so.
It's no wonder that we judge the health of the newborn by how hysterically they cry in the delivery room. My point in bringing all of this up is to say that death isn't the first life-changing existential experience you've gone through. Was birth scary? Most likely. But every single day since then, you learned more and more about the experience that is being alive. To the point where you thought of going back to the state you were in before birth has now become the idea you fear. Mark Twain once wrote, "I do not fear death. I had been dead for billions and billions of years before I was born, and had not suffered the slightest inconvenience from it." This perfectly expresses another truth that most people fail to consider when it comes to death. We all know and seem to accept easily that there was an infinite amount of time before we were alive on Earth. So why is it so hard for some of us to grapple with the fact that there will also be an infinite amount of time that comes after our existence on Earth? When someone dies at an early age, we feel great sadness for all the earthly events they won't be able to be a part of. But when a baby is born, we don't mourn everything they missed out on before their delivery. We all seem to know how nonsensical it would be to feel sad about that. A baby's time of birth is what it is, a fixed situation which nobody has had really any control over. But when it comes to death, there seems to be so many what-ifs or if-onlys involved. Maybe it's because of the how and when of our passing seems to say something about the way that we live. Consider the death of Robert Atkins, the man who dedicated a large majority of his life to refining the Atkins diet and preaching it as the most health-conscious way to live, only to die by slipping on an icy sidewalk. People often reference this as a way to say that death is inevitable, no matter how healthily one chooses to live. A message which, ironically enough, is the exact opposite of the one Atkins spent his life trying to convey. Stories like Robert's are another major reason why some of us find death so frightening. The idea that the where, how, and when of our passing puts a climactic punctuation mark at the end of our existence and somehow adds to the definition of what our life meant. You either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. We seem to accept and even participate in creating these punctuations or labels, even when it comes to external things and people that we have no interpersonal connections to. When a breaking news story emerges where an innocent person is murdered, the majority of us collectively label their life as beautiful and their death as tragic, and when that person's killer is found guilty and sentenced to death, we label their life as despicable and their death as deserved. Labeling others is a comforting habit that is strongly hardwired into our psychology. It's part of how we organize, simplify, and make sense of our world. Yet we all know that even the best one-word label couldn't possibly be used to sum up the entirety of who and what a person is, and what the life they lived was. So the idea that our death could assign us with one of these simplistic labels, which don't allow any room for the complexity of who we really were, is terrifying. If there's anything certain and non-debatable, it's that death is a termination of our physical bodies. Our hearts stop beating, our neurons cease firing, and we take one last breath. Our physical presence here on Earth is terminated at the time of our deaths. While this is undeniably true, it still leaves us with multiple unanswerable questions. A large one being, are we just a body, a spectacularly designed or random collection of cells, atoms, and molecules that is purely physical? Or is it possible that we're composed of a physical body, a physical mind, and something else? Something intangible and non-physical like, for the lack of a better term, a soul. This debate has been going on between philosophers for a millennium. Epicurus believed quite adamantly that we were merely physical beings whose deaths were a total annihilation of our existence, while some of Plato's most famous dialogues argue for the immortality of the soul. If you believe that there's nothing more to us than the atoms and DNA that compose our physical bodies and minds, then you might be what modern philosophers call a physicalist. If, on the other hand, your inclination is to believe that we are composed of a physical body, a physical mind, and something intangible that resembles a soul, then you might be what they call a dualist. There are other variations and subsects of these definitions, but for simplicity's sake, we'll leave it there. Thinking back now to the problem of death with all this in mind, we can clearly see that whether or not someone is a dualist or physicalist makes an enormous difference in the ways they would interpret their beliefs about death, and ultimately whether they would fear death or not. If death is a definitive end to the physical body, then, as far as physicalists are concerned, death is a pretty straightforward pill to swallow. Death is just the end. But for dualists, the possibilities are quite endless. For if we possess something like a soul, then the range of options of what could happen to that soul after our physical bodies die is wide open. While some people cling to religious texts and beliefs for some answers and comfort, non-religious people are left with a huge uncertainty over what life after death holds. And as humans, we have evolved to be naturally scared of the unknown. Maybe the best place to turn to for further investigation of death is to consider the stories of people who have died. The Near-Death Experience Research Foundation presents what many would consider to be the most compelling scientific evidence for life after death. Jeffrey Long, the foundation's creator, has studied and examined the accounts of thousands of people who have reportedly had near-death experiences. While no two people's near-death experiences are exactly the same, there are some characteristic features that have been commonly observed. Long has conducted and posted 5,100 interviews to date with people who have claimed to have had an NDE and compiled the data he's gotten from them over the years. In this, he identified 12 essential elements that are consistently present in his subjects, some of which are an out-of-body experience, encountering deceased relatives, friends, or mystical beings, and experiencing a sense of alteration in time or space. Technically speaking, having any kind of lucid experience while one is clinically dead, without a heartbeat, should be impossible. Still, 74% of the people interviewed reportedly felt conscious and alert during their time spent dead than they did in their waking lives. The remaining 20.4% reportedly felt the same amount of consciousness awareness in death as they do alive, while only 5.2% said they experienced less. Even though the belief that death is the end of our consciousness is relatively common, out of the thousands of people who participated in this survey, only 5% reported that to be true for their near-death experience. These statistics are startling for sure, and there are plenty more like this that are equally compelling. But I think that sometimes it can be too easy to tune out the significance of figures like these because, well, you can find statistical data to support just about any claim you're trying to make these days. Perhaps a more powerful and effective way to discuss NDEs is to delve into specific stories. Take this one, for example, reported by a woman who died by accidental electrocution at the age of 7. I was transported out of my body and surrounded by the brightest, warmest light ever. The only way to explain it is our true home. It felt very familiar. It felt like home. I had never felt at home here on Earth before or after this experience. I didn't feel or see my body. I believe I was more like a pure light source that flows just like a river of pure love and joy. I was just so happy to be home. Another person claimed that the Earth is like a film that hasn't been developed. Not until we reach the other side is the film developed. Everything will be seen in beautiful colors that don't exist here on Earth. And another said, in an instant, I knew that the life we live is an illusion. It's not real because it's a creation of our minds. We continually create thoughts and then project these thoughts outside of the mind, just as cinematic frames are projected onto a screen. Reports like these are incredibly interesting, but you might be wondering where the proof is. For all we know, these are just subjective accounts that people could be just making up. And you would be right. Sadly, as of right now, there is no definitive proof of the validity of NDEs. Like you, I also started off my research into this a little bit skeptical, but the more of these stories I heard and read over time, the harder it became for me to believe that there wasn't at least some validity to them. No matter what belief you choose to carry with you about what happens to us after we die, I think it's important to research the literature out there. Learn what the people who have first-hand knowledge have to say, and use all the information to form a real, thought-out opinion for yourself. Because sadly, there is no way to tie a bow on this topic and wrap it up nicely. No matter what any of us say, death will always remain an existential mystery. But if you struggle with the fear of death, here is something that helped me tremendously, in hopes that it helps you too. The most comforting thing about death is that it will happen to us all.
Every day we're bombarded with ideas, opinions, information, and misinformation, all of which only makes things more confusing. But amidst all the noise, there are voices worth listening to. People who have spent years, sometimes lifetimes, trying to understand the human experience. Experts who may not have all the answers, but who ask better questions than most. That's why we made this show. It's a podcast where we invite the world's leading experts to talk about matters that matter. A space for long, honest conversations about the human condition, philosophy, psychology, meaning, suffering, joy, the mind, and today, death. We discuss what happens when we die. How do we make sense of something so inevitable yet so scary? Here's our podcast host, Mike, to take us on a beautiful journey, the journey of death.
Hello and welcome to the Aperture podcast. Here at Aperture, we recently completed work on a long-form deep dive into the various ways religion has been used and abused throughout the ages to exploit the faith of followers. It got us thinking about the underlying reasons why religion has such a powerful grip on the human psyche. One of the most obvious, you might say cynical reasons, is because religion helps us grapple with death. As Joseph Campbell once noted, man is the only creature that consciously knows we are going to die, and religion is one of the very few tools that can help us make sense of that and offer some sort of promise that death might not be the end. Death is obviously a very taboo subject and not something we typically like to think about, but we decided to lean into the subject of death, and we decided the best place to start was with a woman who has been helping people die for well over a decade, who has advocated for end-of-life rights in the California legislature, and who has been profiled on NPR and the Los Angeles Times, amongst many other places. I am speaking of Jill Schock, a death doula. Jill, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I think most of us know what a doula is. It's somebody, if you want to have more, maybe they do, maybe they don't. Women who want to have a more natural childbirth would have. Maybe if you want to have birth at home, or you just don't want to do a classic hospital birth, would have a doula. Death doula is something we're less familiar with. What is a death doula?
I mean, I think it's a really good using. The image of a birth doula is actually really good for people who haven't heard about it before, because like a birth doula might carry a woman through pregnancy to term, through the birth, and then do postpartum work, I would work with people who learn that they have a terminal diagnosis, walk them through their hospice experience, their death, and then grief work afterwards.
Death is something most of us would prefer to not think about. Are we right to be afraid of death?
Not afraid, but I think there is, you mentioned Joseph Campbell, and it goes kind of back further than that. There's a great philosopher named Soren Kierkegaard, which is like one of the first people to point out that it's a part of our unique consciousness as humans, to be aware of our death, and that causes both dread and awe kind of at the same time. So this idea was picked up maybe like 100 years later, right? Because no one wants to talk about it, by Ernest Becker. And he writes the book, The Denial of Death, which basically explains that we kind of have to carry this healthy fear or denial, or we would go crazy.
Yes.
We have to create an identity, meaningful stuff, names, relationships, religions, cultures, things like that to keep us sane.
So, should we be afraid of death?
No, I think death is easier than people think. I think the thing to be afraid of is suffering.
Okay. Can you describe your religious background? I think you have some religious training of a sort, and to what extent, if any, it informs your current work.
Yeah. So I have a master's degree from Vanderbilt Divinity School. So I spent some time, I suppose, in a seminary-like setting. But my study was more about how humans make meaning when life is interrupted by crisis, illness, or death. So I was less on the biblical and preacher side of the theological education that I was more in philosophical meaning making and clinical experience. So I guess that might put me in a more spiritual bracket, but I am a clinical chaplain by trade.
Do you see a through line?
Yeah, I think so.
How would you describe the through line?
I mean, it kind of depends on what part of the country you're in, right? Because we have different religious views and different cultural settings. So I think the through line is people wanting to hold on to something that helps them make meaning, whether that's a deity, a church, or if it's just, the cosmos, or something simple like being in the ocean or something like that. So however you connect to something that seems higher than yourself would be a through line.
How does one get into this line of work?
I think you have to experience death.
So then you would describe it as a calling.
Yeah, I would. And I would say that most people who are in this work would also describe it that way.
So most people, at least currently, do not use death doulas for themselves or within their families. What is it about the traditional, let's say, Western or American practice of dying and facing death that you find lacking?
Well, there's two sides to death and dying, right? There's the clinical side, so what you experience on the healthcare ends, and then there's the funeral care side. And you kind of get wedged between these two systems, and a lot of people really get swept down the river. I think there's a lot of difficulty now, especially with cancer and the evolving technology of cancer, of where do you draw the line with your quality of life. That's been a really big struggle lately.
Mm-hmm.
And then
you mean being technically alive versus still being really living, capable of living with a quality of life that most of us would consider a baseline for it sort of being worth staying alive.
Right.
Yeah. Does everybody need a death doula?
I would say yes.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a really good tool to have, especially because, working between these two industries, they're kind of stuck in their own box.
Yeah.
You really need someone who's willing to work in the gray area and help you on both ends, be a true advocate for you. So doulas are paid directly by the client. So I have an obligation to you, to work directly for you and make sure you get what you want. Otherwise, like I said earlier, just getting swept down that river, people lose a lot of power. They lose a lot of money as well,
How do you mean that?
Well, doulas, even though they're an out-of-pocket expense, they can help you save money, especially on the funeral end of things.
How so?
Well, the funeral industry is like wrought with overpricing, and it has been for a very long time. In fact, there's really only one regulation that's placed on them, and it was only placed there in 1984.
Which is?
The general pricing list. So they have to show you their prices up front, and that can't change. Because before they do a switcheroo, like in the end. And
like the thing where you go to the car dealer and you think you know the payment, and then they keep you sitting around for half of the day, and by the end it's like 30% higher, and you're like, I've been here, I may as well just sign the thing.
Yeah, exactly. Or you don't want to give your loved one, cheap care.
Right.
But the truth is they still make up those prices. So if you are dealing with the decision of a $12,000 casket or getting care for mom before she dies, doulas can say, why don't we do a cremation, save you $12,000 and get mom that care she needs before. So boom, there's like a flip in how you're using the money.
Yeah. Well, that's assuming you can get the mom on board with that. Now, there's a huge generational thing here, which you must see. Well, that's a question. To what extent do you deal with clients who want you to work with them, and how many of them are people who want you to work with their parents or their elders? I would imagine generationally there's a radical difference there. I can imagine having a death doula myself. I can't imagine suggesting it to my parents.
Yeah, so I would say the front part of my career, because I started in 2009, was dealing with the greatest generation, right? So they were way more difficult. It was easier for me to function in the capacity of a chaplain because things were still more religious, I would say. And now that we're opening up to the boomers, or what some might call the silver tsunami, I see more creativity and openness and a desire to show who they are. I mean, this is the generation of civil rights, rock and roll, summer of love. Like, they don't want to be like their parents that are super traditional. They're actually really fun. And their kids, it's 50-50 who kind of comes to me. But their kids are also really creative and have good relationships most of the time with their parents if they're calling someone like me to get involved.
Fun was not an adjective I was expecting you to use.
It can be fun.
How can it be fun?
If people get in touch with the reality of death, and this is why I call myself a death doula. I don't sugarcoat it, because if you're coming to me, we're working with death. right?
Do people come to you saying, well, I know it's inevitable, so let's start a relationship now? Or is it more often, I've got the diagnosis?
I've got the diagnosis.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I need people to have that in order to move forward.
I see.
Because I can't work with you for years. You know, I can only work with you in a short period of time.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's
Getting back to the fun part.
the fun. Yeah, so if you have the time and the awareness, you can actually design something that's really unique to you, like having a party before you die.
Yeah.
Those change the whole game because psychologically, both the dying person and the people that they love get to say goodbye.
Right. Which is, I was always raised to believe I was raised in a very traditional Irish Catholic family, and there was wakes and everything. When you're a kid, I don't want to go near the coffin. It looks weird. And the mantra that was always repeated is, it's not for the dead person, it's for the living to make their peace with to see them one last time. Surely what you are suggesting, although it can see where it's uncomfortable of a thought at first, is better than, you know, the practices we currently have of going down to a funeral home and seeing.
I mean, yes, and it depends on the funeral home, right? Because most funeral homes will encourage and upsell embalming.
Yeah.
So they're trying to create something that they've dubbed the memory picture. And as soon as you give your body to a funeral home, they dictate the memory picture. So that might come with embalming, that might come with makeup, cosmeticize, you know, the natural form of the body, which some people could view as healing, some people could view as disrespectful.
Sure, you could make that argument. I cannot believe I've made it this far into my own personal life without having a death truly close to me, truly a close friend or an immediate family member. In the most simple and direct terms, what is death like?
Shattering. It's almost like, you know, you take off those rose-colored glasses, you know, and
so I feel like you're answering from the point of view of which was the spirit in which I meant it, to the loved ones around them.
yeah.
Okay,
I
so
mean,
keep going.
Yes, and with the dying person, it never becomes real until it's real. You know, so we as livers, you know, won't feel that feeling until it's true. I think going back to the denial of death, it protects us from that.
Yes.
And it's sort of like a woman about to give birth, or like, okay, it's go time. I think the dying person has a really similar rush of thoughts and energy.
I see. Right. They say very often with women that biology tricks them into thinking after they have their first child that it was bad, but it wasn't that bad. Because if they truly remembered, nobody would have a second child.
That's true.
That observation has been made. So it does set in. You think typically with your clients, there is a moment where, how do they express that?
People know the truth and they express it in different ways. They might never say it out loud. They might be fully open about it with everyone they meet, making everyone uncomfortable. So it really,
I know some of those. Yeah.
Yes, it depends on the person and how they want to express their coping.
Yeah. What is a good death, and on the other side of the coin, what is a bad death?
It's tricky because I think there is a fantasized version of death, right, that we come across in Hollywood, or if you've never seen a death before, you don't know about the little gurgles and, you know, things that happen that are natural but potentially disturbing. So I think a good death would be dictated by the person who's dying, whatever that looks like. And that can be really hard because it's their picture, not ours.
What do you mean by that? What would be their picture? What would be it, for example?
Well, people can choose how long they go and you know, get treatment or take medication for comfort or not. Yeah. You know, so depending on what choices they make earlier on, it might dictate how their body goes through the death labor. And I think it's important because people will say, well, I wish they would have done this, or why won't they take the morphine, or why are they taking too much? You know, you just have to let them lead. And I think that's a good death, no matter what it looks like to us, which is a really difficult concept to
Did you have much experience with the actual nuts and bolts of experiencing people dying before you leapt into this line of work?
I grew up in a German apostolic church where we always did open caskets, and we even had services for the dead in cemeteries. So I was really familiar with death and dying, and praying for souls and whatnot. So I think that was a part of my education. I also got my hands on probably some books that weren't age appropriate when I was young. Like I was reading Holocaust books and Edgar Allan Poe when I was like 8. So I had
So you're kind of just a professional goth?
an inclination. Yeah. I had a goth phase for sure.
Gotcha. Yeah. Loud and clear.
But yeah.
Yeah, sure. All right. How do you, as much as, you obviously have some core memories of being open to this, in touch with this, comfortable with this in a way that the average person isn't, still you have your own personal life to lead. How do you not take your work home with you at the end of the day, or do you?
I don't. I think after 16 years, you learn how to compartmentalize. But also you value what's important, relationships, how they play out in your life, what truly brings you happiness, how you make money, where you live, what you spend your money on. It's like, for me, I love food and beverage. I love vacations. I love dinner with friends. Like it's, those moments, I really do make them matter, because I could get a diagnosis today. I could have something going on right now. And, this is all we have, what's in front of us, really.
Some people will tell you that when it comes to death, it is harder typically for the family than it is for the individual. You're nodding your head. You find that to be true. To what extent is that true, and how?
I think it's the hardest thing for the dying person, because I really do think slipping into death is fairly easy and comfortable. But I think it's hardest for the dying person to leave their loved ones. And you'll find that people will actually linger in their unconscious dying phase. So after they're, looks like they're in a deep sleep, they still have these strong energetic attachments to people who love them. And sometimes if someone's like at the bedside the whole time, like, okay, maybe let's take a break and see if we can give them the space to not be holding on to your energetic attachment. And that's when they go. Or vice versa, they wait till someone gets there, the plane lands, they rush in the room, and then they go, So it really kind of depends on the dying person. But of course, it's hard to watch someone you love die. I think the concept of separation physically forever on both ends is difficult.
And I don't want to ask this question, but I can't help but ask this question. What happens? What change? Is there a physical change that overtakes the body sort of instantly at the moment?
When someone takes their last breath? Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting, because they'll take so in the final moments of death, they're experiencing something called apnea. We've all heard of sleep apnea.
Yes.
So there's gaps between the breaths. So usually if we're witnessing that, we'll see longer pauses. And so there's kind of this, will they, won't they? And then when they don't, there's like this in-between breath of waiting. And then there's the realization. And then you can start to see the body change color almost instantly. And you can sometimes they'll let out a final sigh, or sometimes they won't, but you can almost see this, like, the word I want to use is deadening. And it's like, they're dead. Like if you covered up 3 bodies or whatever, and like 1 was dead and 2 were alive, you could probably energetically feel which one wasn't there. And you get that sense of that person is gone after someone takes their last breath.
Right. So the language that we still use is someone has passed away. You're saying that person is gone. We never say that person is over. Right? And
Game over.
That person ended. When, let's, we can speculate about what happens to us after we die. That's a possibility. You were and you are no more. what is your personal opinion in regard to the existence of a soul? And of course, how does your work inform that? Because that would be the most obvious. That would be any religious person would be screaming at their speaker or their screen right now. Well, dummy, yes, that's the soul leaving the body, and you're seeing the shell or whatever word you want to use.
The soul and or consciousness, it kind of depends on how you categorize those things. I don't know. I'm more of a William James type seeker.
Okay, explain that.
Well, I'm constantly looking at more things, like the more, what's coming, like what am I noticing, what am I observing, very pragmatic. So my opinions on what happens changes a lot, but there is a common mystic type stream within my work that before people die, they do experience quite a bit, which is in line very much with near-death experiences.
Yeah, and I want to ask you about all this sorts of things.
Sure.
Okay.
So at this moment, I'm looking at NDEs and this process that the dying go through and kind of think they're in the same category. I still don't know what happens to people after.
You don't even have if you don't have a firm conviction, how are any of the rest of us supposed to?
That's a part of the work.
So, I mean, you've already answered my question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Do you feel like you can see, is there any part of you that feels like you can see a soul leaving the body?
Yeah, I think that process.
Okay, and how would you describe that?
Yeah, just that physicality of, and it's also a feeling. Like you can feel it. Like I've had clients, I had a client and their spouse in the room, and when they took their final breath, their wife also passed out. That's kind of how tangible the feeling is of that consciousness or breath or soul, whatever you want to call it, is leaving the body. So you can feel it. Something is happening, but what it is, I think that's up to interpretation.
Have you been present for someone who experienced or claimed to experience a near-death experience?
Yes.
Okay, so can you talk about that?
Yeah, more than I used to work in a cardiac ICU and on a stroke ward. So in those two settings, you do have people who experience, death for a few moments or a few minutes. And I've had people say that they saw, the light and their ancestors and that typical story, like, oh, this is easy, this feels good, but then something pulls them back, whatever it is. It's a purpose, like medicine, whatever.
Yeah, it's not your time yet, right?
It's not, yeah. And that's really magical. And I love those stories. And I've also had people be like, it was black, it was nothing.
Right.
So.
Okay. All right. Well, so there's people saying it's good, it's easier, there's nothing to fear, death is not the end. And then there's people saying I saw nothing. Nobody's at least saying really bad stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. I had one gentleman that people often enter like hallucinations or, seeing beyond the veil, if you will. And this one guy, he kept having these visions of like animals, like having a parade for him and like leaving. So that's really pleasant. But there was one night where the animals seemed like a little scarier, so I don't know. I don't know. Just like we have dreams, we have nightmares.
Yes.
I'm sure that's all folded in somehow, but maybe we don't hear about the dark side of it.
Right. Right. That's the most rational explanation, is you're entering a sort of dream state and you're in a dream reality. I've heard anecdotally people say that people who've had parents that, approach death in the house or whatever, saying the daytimes are okay. It's the nights that are, which on a sort of primal level tracks.
Yeah.
The thing that even as a child, or sometimes, let's face it, as an adult, the thing that goes bump in the night doesn't bother you during the day. It bothers you at night. Do you think to what extent would you guess the attitude that people have when the line between reality and fantasy or the approaching afterlife is sort of blurring, is just informed by their mental state of mind, either the kind of person they've been, an anxious person, an optimistic person, or just where that they have been in, for example, if you knew that you were sick for 5 years and you've had a lot of time to prepare for it and you've done the work, versus I was just in a car accident. I was not expecting this to be dying to be my afternoon. It would seem like that's a pretty easy way of explaining why some people have one experience and some have another. It's just how much anxiety, why we have bad dreams when we're taking anxiety from our day into our sleep.
Yeah.
Does that track?
Yeah, and I mean, we'll never really get the stories of people who die instantly, and what I can't imagine what their thought process is. It's probably like, no, what the fuck? I don't want to die now. Whereas people have time to be prepared, have an easier process. So, what are the stories that are coming back to the living?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is just salacious stuff, but we're not naming names here. Have you heard any good deathbed confessions?
No, but I do have a really great, I like to collect last words. And yeah, the best one, really cool, very cool guy. He was like a car guy like my dad, and he had a planned death, which is legal in California, and he took the medication and he was just leaning into it, and he kind of went unconscious for a minute, and then he came out of his little dream spell, and he was like, pastrami sandwich, and then he went back and then he died. And me and his daughters just thought that was great, and they wrote me a card later and kind of wrote about that, and that was a really good one.
Yeah, that's exactly, I love a good pastrami sandwich.
Me too.
That's exactly how I want
respect.
to go. Well, that's your book, huh? Famous or just the last words.
Yeah, I take a lot of quotes directly from my clients when I'm working with them. I take handwritten notes, and I write down things that they say.
Yeah. Beyond just the last words, are there particular, and again, you don't want to betray anybody's privacy or confidence, but clients who stay with you in a particular way, and who and why?
I mean, I try not to connect as much as I might have when I was younger, just for self-preservation. But in particular, I'm more curious about narratives around how people make sense of why this is happening to them. Like I did everything right, or the why me kind of aspect.
Yeah.
And it's hard to have those conversations and some clients are open to this and some clients will be appalled, but why not you as well? It could be me, it could be you, it could be anybody. One day it will be someone, me.
Yeah.
So there's no difference from one human to another. It's just a matter of when.
We all stubbornly cling to the notion, even though we know it's not true, that life is quote unquote fair. And,
right.
And it feels like this. If this doesn't feel like my time, and for most people, we're probably never going to say, wow, this would be a great time for me to die. I was professionally acquainted with Larry King. You remember Larry King?
Yeah.
The guy was 110 years old and still hosting 3 TV shows, terrified every night when he went to bed, because it was never going to be his time. He wanted to be wearing suspenders and asking people softball interview questions for 1,000 years.
Yeah. That thing that you're saying about being afraid every night is very common with people who are dying. They will avoid sleep.
Yes.
Because they are
I've heard of people
afraid.
avoiding their bed.
Yeah, their bed, sleep. They'll sit up on the couch or in their lazy boy, but they will avoid sleep because they know that it's like a liminal state that you enter when you're in REM, and you could easily cross over. And they've probably felt that and maybe even toyed with it a little previously.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, people know the truth. That's why they avoid sleep, because they know it can happen then.
What do you think about euthanasia? It's been in the headlines, the quote unquote suicide pod or death pod in one of the Scandinavian countries. There's some awful controversy, and I don't know how familiar you are with this.
I'm very familiar.
Putting the specifics of that aside, that ought to have for a rational person, ought to have no bearing on what you think in general of should there be. I don't know if humane doesn't seem like a word that typically applies to humans, but a civilized way that we can all sort of, as a society, agree this person is making a rational, informed decision. They're not just feeling a little bummed out. It is their time, and we respect their right to choose the time and place and manner of their demise.
Yeah, so different countries, different social attitudes.
Of course.
Right? Canada and Switzerland and the United States have very differing versions of this, because you can have terminal depression or Alzheimer's dementia or, MS and go to a country like, Switzerland and be able to take part in medical aid in dying, where in the United States you need to have an active terminal illness and you can't be compromised in your mind at all. So even if you have a history of depression or something like that, you might not qualify. Or Parkinson's, you're off the list. Or you also have to be physically able to take the medication. So an illness like ALS, which should have direct access to this type of exit, would be forced not to have access to it. So different countries, different laws, and I think those are really dictated around like the social environment that creates those laws.
I'm gathering your personal opinion is you would wish that as a society we could get to a place where we're more like countries.
Yeah, I helped get the law passed in Southern California for, medical aid in dying.
Tell me about that.
The bill was on with Governor Brown in 2015, and I can't remember which state, but we were, I believe, one of the first 5. It was like Oregon, like in the 90s, and then Washington in like 2008, and then like Colorado and Vermont, and then California or something. So, right now we still have this. People still have a right to die if they have a qualifying terminal illness, and they can just take a drink and go at their own will, which prevents a lot of suffering. It can be that window between unconscious dying and death. Sometimes there's a lot of suffering that take place, and some people just want to skip that, almost like a woman having an epidural, or twilight birthing from back in the day.
Right. You, I would guess, would sometimes be in a challenging position where you have been down this road enough times, that somebody is on their way, they're not going to come back, and now we're just prolonging the inevitable. And I've heard, again, anecdotally, people have these, advanced directives of just don't keep me alive with machines. I don't want, but then when it comes down.
Yeah. So I definitely am a strict follower of advanced directives. Those are legal documents.
Yes.
And, someone can be prosecuted in court by not following those, but many people don't follow up and do that. So people don't understand the weight of potential consequences. And you have to be really careful who you choose as your agent or power of attorney, because they can choose, once you lose capacity, whatever they want. So
it sounds like you've got some sort of horror stories there.
Oh yeah. It happens all the time.
For, like, what would be for example?
Someone coding and their husband, in an ICU, so coding is like when the heart stops, code blue. And so the whole like resuscitation team comes in and starts chest compressions. And if the family members say like, yes, go intubate, do everything possible, because they're in the moment, and they're a DNR on paper, but the family in that moment can override it. And that's really sad, because CPR is very physical, it can be very brutal, and it doesn't bring everybody back, that's for sure. So yeah, I've seen it too many times. I've seen people take over care, lock other people out, directly go against the wishes of someone who's, impaired. So yeah, this is also a part of death and dying, that people's worst coping mechanisms will come up, and that's what they'll drive with.
Yes.
So you have to be really aware.
Yes, it's a critical time. What is your role after the person has died, assuming you've had some pre-existing relationship with the family, because that's a danger zone.
Yeah.
Families get torn apart, and I'm assuming you don't actually get involved with the reading of wills and all of that, but it's a time in life when people need to make some very mature decisions, and it's a time when their wounds, their emotions are as raw as they could ever possibly be. Mm-hmm. What is your role? How do you approach helping to navigate the family once your client has passed away?
Yeah, so I try to set that up on the first time that I'm meeting this group or this family or the inner circle, whoever's going to be with the client, because I want to pre-educate them that they're going to be functioning in that matter. And so just the awareness of, you know, if I'm in this headspace, what kind of decisions am I making then versus how do I feel now, and when we're having this discussion up front. And so oftentimes you can just remind them, like, remember when we talked about this?
Yeah.
Now it's happening, you know, because it does change. Everything changes after somebody dies. So, you know, but still, people still fight. Again, people are going to people. You can't change who they are, but you can educate.
Sure. Okay, well, let's talk about that. So when you take on a client, and let's say it's their idea jointly with their partner, but now they want to bring in, say, their adult children. Is everybody always happy to be there? Hey, come on by. We're meeting with my death doula.
No, some people literally hate me, which is fine. It's not about me. I'm not the harbinger. You know, I'm just a professional, but I understand.
I mean, you're not a harbinger, but it's not. I can put myself in their shoes, and
Yeah, no, I get it. If we're denying death as a coping mechanism, the person who's here to talk about death is your least favorite person.
Yeah.
So some kids, I've had people scream, walk out of the room, yell at me, you know, but I get it. It's a part of the process. But I think one of the hardest things is when people decide to stop treatment. And that's when people get really angry that they didn't try enough and they didn't, you know, do this or do that. And it's like, you weren't going through the treatment. You don't know what it's like. And none of us know. So, you know, that's where I'm coming from. I don't get involved with family squabbles, but I do understand why people get, you know, angry at me.
Are you familiar with the concept of Swedish death cleaning?
Yes.
Okay. I gather Amy Poehler developed a TV show about it.
Oh, I don't know.
I don't know if it's actually been made.
Okay.
So it's a thing that
Yeah.
I only heard of yesterday.
Yeah.
What is Swedish death cleaning?
One of my clients would call it denesting.
Right. No, and that's sort of the joke about it is what's the difference? Because my parents are of a certain age and there's don't give me any more stuff. I've already got too much stuff. Here, take this. Here, take this.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm hopefully, God willing, not facing death anytime soon. And I feel like I'm already decluttering. What's the difference between decluttering and Swedish death cleaning?
Well, possessions are one of the things that add to meaning making and the denial of death. So, and we see this with hoarders, right? A lot of times hoarders are people that have experienced very complicated grief. And so they hold on to every single thing that they possibly can to make them feel safe. So death cleaning is kind of like a version of starting to let go of these possessions over time, or all at once if you know you have a diagnosis. I think the concept of minimalism is catching on now more than ever.
Yeah.
So that's kind of nice because I've dealt with a lot of hoarders and a lot of like cluttered houses.
Yeah, I was going to say the Container Store still seems like they're doing pretty well. Marie Kondo's got a
Junk
pretty good
removal,
career
auctions,
growth. Yeah. A lot of people are still holding on to a lot of Target still seems pretty busy.
Yeah, and I do work with professional organizers and professional like declutterers to help with this process after or even before.
Yeah. Many of us, perhaps most of us, have people in our lives, older relatives, who would not be open to having death doulas when the time of their passing approaches. We obviously can't replace what you do, but what tips can we take from what you've learned and your techniques to be sort of mini death doulas to our loved ones?
I mean, just follow the lead of the dying person, as hard as that sounds, because some people don't even want hospice care because that's the H word, and that killed their mother with morphine or whatever. People get these, you know, they weave stories together after intense experiences. So, you know, if you don't have a doula, if you can, try to get in touch with a palliative care team, you know, just to talk about options and treatment at the same time. So there's an even conversation. But also, you know, so palliative care and hospice are pros at talking about this.
Yeah.
So typically, though, it's just such a fast-paced environment. They might not have the time or the staff to take that time with you, which is why there's a gap for doulas. But there's still good medical staff out there.
Do you feel like there are other cultures, obviously in terms of assisted death or euthanasia, we've talked about other cultures that have more open-minded views about, being accepting of that and embracing that. But there's this cliche that, in the West, we can't deal with it. And then there's always this beautiful idea of Eastern mysticism that they're perfectly well adjusted and everybody's, internalized a bunch of sayings from Confucius.
Yeah.
What are things that we can read or think about or do to, it's one of these things I don't know. You use the example of a woman giving birth. You go to Lamaze classes, and I'm sure it's very helpful. Nothing will prepare you, but if the alternative is blocking it out of your mind and pretending it's not going to happen to you until it's too late, what can or should we be doing while we still have the time and the faculties to make our peace with the inevitability of death?
I guess I want to bring Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in at this point.
Okay.
Because she talks about and did, pragmatic research on the dying and found these patterns of what people experience while they're going through the dying process. And typically the last one is acceptance. But some people don't get to acceptance until they're in their unconscious dying phase. So there's really nothing you can do to get people towards that point. They have to reach it themselves. And whether that takes place while they're still kind of earthbound or in their liminal space before they die is really more so up to them. Does that make sense?
Sort of, but that's a person who's sort of already in the process. How should I be thinking about the fact that I am going to die someday and that my loved ones are going to die, and it's a natural part of life in the same way. We're not going to celebrate their death in the same way that we celebrate the birth of a child or something like that, but to embrace it as a natural, to make it less of a boogeyman, I guess is what I'm saying. Yeah,
I think a lot of it is kind of ego slashing, right? Why me? Why not you? You absolutely could die today. Have you thought of that? It's most people won't go there. But I think exercising a muscle, there might be a way to exercise I'm a fragile being. Today could be the last day. Am I happy with where I'm at? How can I make the present, a heaven space? The present is the good space for you.
Well, okay, maybe I think my last question is just sort of a different way of asking the same question. You've been really present with any number of people at the moment of their passing. Are there commonalities that you see in terms of the sorts of lives that you think people led who have good deaths versus the people who maybe have bad deaths?
Well, there's two categories of dyers, I guess I should say, because remember, good or bad is kind of in the hands of the dyer. But some people are passive and some people cling. Some people are controlling, stubborn, and some people are like, whoop, I'm just going to go. I'm just going to go with it. I'm just going to die. And some people really hang on. For whatever reason, it's a part of their personality. It's that energetic flow they've had their entire life. They're not used to letting go, giving up. And, just allowing that. Those are the patterns that I see, is that people are kind of one way or the other. And you can kind of see what it's going to be just by learning about their personality and their history and their life.
Well, so that's sort of what I'm getting at, is if we want to the extent that it is within our control, and very often I'm sure it would not be, what are things we can address within ourselves in the living years, so to speak, we all want to feel a sense of peace and completion at the end of our lives. We want the novel to have a decent ending. So what are the things that can make us not be the person who's holding on?
Yeah, it's hard to answer. And it's also a part of my job not to give these direct answers, because that's up to you. I can't make that happen for you. I can't give you a script that's going to get you there. You have to sit and evaluate your own life and what equals happiness for you. Our definitions of happiness are going to be totally different. So, that's why a great reason to hire a doula is giving people the time to talk about what matters and then spending what time they have if they haven't thought about it before.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for your time. Are there any books or resources you would recommend that people?
Yes.
The Tibetan Book of Death and Dying is BS, right?
I mean,
Because
it's
some guy wrote it in the 80s or whatever.
It's a good book. But you have to be more theologically inclined to read something like that because it is more of a religious text. I would say for people who want to know more about the denial of death, there's a great book by Sheldon Solomon called The Worm at the Core. It expands on Kierkegaard's and Becker's work on the denial of death using social experiments to prove that people act differently when faced with mortality. So that's a really good one. Also, Sheldon Solomon is still a professor at Skidmore College, so he's among us. He's someone who can talk now about this stuff. I'm also a big fan of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Obviously, there's On Death and Dying, but there's another great one called Dying: The Final Stage of Growth, which is all client-patient narratives and what dying is like for them. And so if you really want to dig into the dying experience, that's a great book.
All right, thank you. And for people who want to know more about you and your work, they can go to deathdoulala.com.
Yes.
That's right. Thank you so much for your time, Jill.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed our conversation with Jill Schock. More importantly, we hope it gave you some food for thought, a couple of potential takeaways. What are the sorts of things we can do during the living years to help ensure a sense of completion and finality and perhaps even peace when we reach the end? Also, I will confess I was a little disappointed. I was hoping somebody who has spent so much time physically and emotionally and spiritually present at the time of other people's passing might have a little bit more insight into the possible existence of the human soul or transcendence. Maybe the fact that she's not even sure about that stuff tells us everything we need to know. But we'd like to hear what you think. What are things we can do during our lives to help ensure a quote-unquote good death? And what happens to us after we die? Leave your answers to those questions in the comments, and we'd also love to hear the sorts of guests you'd like to hear and see here in the future. Until then, I'm Mike Tully. This has been the Aperture Podcast.
The world is a big and confusing place. Every day we're bombarded with ideas, opinions, information, and misinformation, all of which only
Imagine a world where death is no longer an inevitable end. A future where science and technology doesn't just help save lives, but extends them indefinitely. That sounds like a sci-fi dream, but the truth is this future might not be as far as you think.